Hello everyone, MarkyGeo1990 here, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to do some basic programming stuff in SRPG Studio. Keep in mind that I'm going to assume you have basic knowledge of JavaScript, which is what you use to program stuff in SRPG Studio, and you're going to need to download a couple things before we begin. Number one, download Notepad++. This fucking program is baller as hell, and it will allow you to do a thing called find in files. So, like, you know how in a lot of programs you can hit, like, Control F and, like, foot, you know, and then it'll tell you to the first instance of foot. So what Notepad++ can do is you can go to, like, Control F, find in files, and then, like, it'll search every friggin' file within the directory you've specified for any instance of the word you type. This will become important later. Another thing you're going to want is you're going to want the SRPG Studio API or script reference. Now, you can just Google this, you know, SRPG Studio API, and then it'll pop up, as you can see from my example. Bam, right then and there. But I would actually recommend you download the file. Now, how do you download the file? You're going to have to go to the SRPG Studio store page. And then you're going to want to go to the workshop. Give it a sec. Yeah, so I'm in the store page. You scroll down, go to visit workshop, and then you're going to want to look for something called SRPG Studio Manual. Give it a sec to load because my computer, for some reason, the internet is very slow. Bippity bop. Okay, so the easiest way to find it, I find, is just to click the most popular thing. And then it'll eventually pop up once, yep, there we go. Okay, so SRPG Studio Official Manual. And then from here, you're gonna want to click the subscribe button and then go into your project, click Steam, show subscribed items, and then right click it, save to file, and then hit OK. And then that will download the manual onto your desktop. From there, let me close out all these windows. Oh, geez. Yeah, you're gonna see the folder. And there's going to be two subfolders. One of them is the SRPG Studio API. You're going to want to click index.html because that's like the basic page. And there you go. So the reason why we want the document and the reason why we want Notepad's find and files thing is because in order to grab certain objects from the game, you need to do like a certain order of operations that brings you to the object you want. This is going to come in handy fairly quickly because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this guy here and change his name from new unit to Greg. Now, you might be wondering, like, how do we get to Greg? Well, I could tell you right away how to do it. Like, you can do it the pussy way and go to, like, change unit info and do Greg. But this is a tutorial about doing programming. This tutorial is meant to put hair on your chest, not to do all that fucking pussy-ass shit. And eventually, you know, being able to program, you'll be able to do all sorts of other fancy stuff with the engine that we might be able to cover later. So, we want to execute a JavaScript command in a different way. Well, we want to execute a different event command. One that executes raw JavaScript, which is the execute script event command. This is interesting because you can also call custom event commands through this, but we're not going to handle that in this video because that's out of the scope. What we're going to handle is execute code. So we need to grab the unit from the game somehow. The first thing I want to tell you is, like, when you're looking for any sort of unit in the game, or like looking for any sort of object, everything starts with root. For example, if you're looking to, like, go into the database, you're gonna want to go to, like, root get base data, as you can see here, and that will essentially bring you to this whole thing here, like player classes, yada yada yada. And then, you know, root get base data, and obviously you can see we have get player list. Now, here's the thing. This is the database version of that character. It's not the in-game version, if that makes any sense. Basically, what the game does is when it generates that character in the game, it creates a copy of them based on what they were in this database. So, believe it or not, the database version of that unit is not what we want. Instead, what we want to do is go to root get current session. And that basically, it's almost like grabbing the game window and what's inside it. That is considered a game session. So 1 second, we're going to execute a script, root get current session. And that will grab the current session. But then, like, we still need to grab the unit. Well, right here has get player list, which gives us a data list object. So a data list is just a list of data. Get player list. In this case, it's a list of units, player units specifically. Now from here, to grab a unit from the player list, we need to use get data or get data from ID. Now, since we only have one unit in the game, there's really only one position on the data list, which is 0. So get data 0. But obviously, if you wanted to grab a specific unit and you didn't know what position they were, in this case we do, you would probably have to do either get data from ID if you know the unit's ID, which, by the way, if you want to know the ID of various things in the game, you're going to want to go to Tools, Options, and then Display ID next to Data Name. So, we've grabbed the unit, but here's the thing. This looks kind of messy. We could be like, you know, set name Greg here, but I mean, it's basically taking up the entire first line. So instead what I'm going to do is going to do var unit. And there we go. So like this variable unit represents the first piece of data within the player list that's in the current session of root. So now we've got our unit. Now we could be like unit set name, Greg. Now let's see if that actually works. Loading time. And there you go. See? His name is Greg. What the hell? That's awesome. So, how was I able to figure all this shit out? How was I able to, like... Because, like, these methods, there's an awful lot you have to sift through just to find the specific thing that you want. So, in this case, we want to grab a unit. So, what we can do is we can search for any method in the game that returns a unit object. And that's where the Notepad++ shit comes in handy. And having the downloaded version of the manual comes in handy. So, I'm going to quickly move this away from the thing. Actually, wait. Okay, so we want to look for something that returns unit. So, yeah, you just type that there. We're not going to replace it with anything. And then from there, you just set your directory to your SRPG Studio API manual thing. Let me just do this off screen so I don't show anything undesirable. As you can see, I have it here, official manual SRPG Studio API. So it's going to look for any instance of unit in between those curly braces. And as you can see, it gets the unit of support subject. So this returns a unit here. So what is this? This method, what is it called? Support data method. Okay, so that object seems to be support data. To manage the assistance. Okay, that's probably not what we want. Get source unit. So, yeah. As you can see here, this shows you all the things that return a unit. And you can see what object has that method that gives you the unit. And so you could be like, all right, what gets talk event info? And then you work backwards from there. So like in this case, bam. Okay, so nothing returns talk event. Fuck. Oh, wait. Get talk event info. Okay, so that returns a talk event info object. Okay, so I was wrong. Yeah. So what is the object that contains this? Event. All right, so you can grab an event, then get talk info, and then like get unit, and that's one way to grab a unit. Now obviously that would be for situations where you want to grab a unit from a talk event, because as you can see, the method said get source unit, so this would be the source unit here. That's what that would grab. So essentially you can, with the combination of Notepad++ and the like full manual in hand, you can actually work backwards and find the functions you want in order to retrieve the objects you want, and then you can fuck with those objects. And that's how I was able to find out that, oh, if I want to grab a player unit on the map, I need to like get the list of players on the map from the current session. How do I get current session? Oh, I need to use the root thing. And that's why a lot of things tend to start with root, because when you work backwards, root has most of the functions that get the objects you want, that get the other objects you want, until finally you reach the one that you actually want. So yeah, that is how you not only change things in the game using the API in JavaScript, but it's also how you figure out what functions give you the things you want. Small discrepancy with my video. There's going to be times where looking for something that returns the object you want isn't going to work. The reason for this is that sometimes objects are part of a data list rather than just being standalone. For example, you saw in the video that when I wanted to change the character's name from new unit to Greg, I got a data list. But if you go to the data list, you'll see that get data doesn't return a unit, it returns data. That's because data lists are fairly ubiquitous and can hold anything in them. So there's going to be times where you want to find a specific object and looking for a method that returns it won't work. So instead, you might want to consider looking up methods that return data lists instead. So yeah, that's it. Hello everyone. So this is it. The tutorial that will separate the men from the boys, the women from the girls. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make plugins for SRPG Studio. So I guess the first question you might be asking is, what are plugins? Plugins are little snippets of JavaScript code that either overwrite or add onto the functionality of SRPG Studio. Now, you might see a folder in your project called script. This has all the code in your game, with some exceptions. There's some code that's hidden behind the game itself, or like the project, the project file. But this right here is most of the code in the game, and you can modify any of it. For example, like if you wanted to change some calculations in the game, you'd probably want to go to Singleton Calculator. But here's the thing, you don't actually want to modify the code that's in the script folder, because sometimes the developers of SRPG Studio will update their code, and that will overwrite any changes you made. Instead, what you want to do is you want to make code files in the plugin folder that overwrite the functions that are located in the script folder. So right here you can see I have a folder that says $nope. It's worth noting that the way the game reads its code is at first it will read everything in the script folder, and then afterwards it will read everything in the plugin folder. And if you have any files that overwrite functions in the script folder, then the game will use those instead of the script folder. Except for files that have $sign at the start, it will just be completely ignored. It's also worth noting that plugins are read in the order of 0 to 9, A to Z. This can be important for troubleshooting, especially if you think plugins are overwriting each other. So now we're going to make a file. It doesn't really matter what file type it is, but my plugin.js. Most people use .js. So, when it comes to adding onto functionality or overwriting it, you're usually going to want to have to do this. You're going to want to write this bit of code, and everything in between is code that overwrites stuff or aliases it in the game. So the next question you might be wondering is like, what are we going to overwrite? Well, let's say you want to change the way the hit rate works in SRPG Studio. Because the way it works currently is that the game takes your character's skill stat, multiplies it by 3, and then adds it to your currently equipped weapon's hit rate stat, and then it applies any bonuses from supports and whatnot. Now, maybe you don't like that. Maybe instead you want the calculation to be skill times 2 rather than skill times 3. So where does how do we change that? Well, first we need to know what functions in the game what function in the game does the hit rate calculating. Now, finding out where that is kind of difficult. Because, where do you even start? There's, a million files in the script folder. Well, this is where you're going to have to do some deduction. So the first thing we know is that the way the game calculates hit rate is that it grabs your unit's skill stat. So, obviously we know that a unit object is involved in some way. So we're going to look at the SRPG Studio API. We're going to look for the unit object. All right, so we got a bunch of methods here. Is there a method that grabs their skill stat? Let's scroll down. Scroll down. Well, we got a method here that gets their HP, which, by the way, that's not their max HP, it's their current HP, which you can also set. But here we've got this thing right here, which is get param value. Now, most people refer to a unit's stats as stats, but SRPG Studio, for some reason, refers to them as parameters. So we know this method is related to getting a unit's parameters. But it's asking for an argument called index, which is, typically when SRPG Studio asks you for an index, indexes tend to refer to a position within an array. So it's asking for the position of the parameter. And depending on what number you put in, it will get a different parameter. But how do you figure out what number represents what parameter? Well, it doesn't explain jack shit here, so now you're going to have to do some problem solving. Something that's important to know is that the SRPG Studio script uses the SRPG Studio API in a lot of cases. So what we can probably do here is we can run a search for get param value and find within the script folder. So this is going to search every single file in our script folder for instances where get param value is used. And as you can see, we've got 3 instances. So I'm going to look at the first one. And it looks like this instance, it's used within a function of an object. And this object is kind of like a base object, which is to say that it's sort of a template that other objects are created from. So with this in mind, that probably means that there is another object similar to this that uses this as its template. Because we can't use this. What does get parameter type mean? Well, we scroll down and it gives us -1. That's not helpful. What does that mean? So what we're going to do is we're going to go here and we're going to scroll down to see if there's anything that uses the base unit parameter object. And look at that. Unit parameter.mhp, which obviously refers to, max HP. And look at that. Get parameter type returns param type MHP. So what is this right here? Well, this is an enumeration. And an enumeration in JavaScript is essentially just an object that stores values. So what we're going to do is now we're going to search within our script again and see where the game defines this variable param type or enumeration. And as you can see here, bam, right here. So param type, MHP, power, magic, skill, speed. Okay, so now we know what each index represents. But we're not going to type 3 for get param value 3, because the game probably doesn't want to do, like, the script probably doesn't do that. It probably just says param type.ski. So we're going to do this. Whoops. We're going to look for any instances where param type.ski is used. And look at that. Oh, all right. So this is used for the uniparameter skill object. That's not useful to us. And neither is this. But what's this? Get ski? Get bonus? All right. So it seems to be getting bonuses that apply to the ski. So this seems to be a function of param bonus. So in this case, it would be like param bonus get ski. Bear in mind, this is how objects are made in JavaScript, is that they like, it's a variable and then it equals curly brace, and then you just put a bunch of functions in here with like a comma at the end. Unless it's the last function, then there is no comma. But yeah, so the game is calling parambonus.getSki, which is a function. What's this? We did another search and we found this. All right, so we got another instance of like get ski, but this time it's real bonus.getSki. All right, so what uses this function? Get hit, ability calculator, bingo. And as you can see right there, weapon, get hit. So this is getting the hit rate of the weapon, and then it's adding our unit's skill times 3. So this is the function we want to overwrite. But how do we overwrite it? Well, this is where our little plugin comes in handy. So, in this case, we don't need to alias the function because we're just getting rid of it outright, but I'll show you how to do both because it's important. So, this function's part of an object called ability calculator. So what we're going to do is ability calculator get hit. I believe that's the name of the function. And then we're going to be like equals function, and the parameters are going to be exactly the same. So it's going to be unit and weapon. And then we're going to return whatever the hit rate's going to be. So I guess what we could do is like this, and then just make that times 2. And then that essentially makes our thing work. So just to verify that it works, I'm going to run the game. I'm going to show you what our character's hit rate was before and after. All right, so this weapon has 75 hit. He's got 4 skill, so 4 times 3 is 12. And that adds up to 87. All right, so now let's make, let's uncomment our little overwrite function and see if that changes his hit rate. And it's correct. It's 83. Let's see. 75 times 8. And that's 83. So we've successfully made a, change the functionality of the game. And what's great about this is that, like, you can upload this file somewhere. Somebody can then take it and use it in their own game. Now, bear in mind, this is, here we overwrote the function, but you're not always going to want to do that. Because let's say you have multiple plugins that overwrite the same function. The one that gets read last by the game is going to be prioritized, and the other ones are going to be straight up ignored. There's going to be instances where you want to alias a function instead, in which that case you make a variable called alias and then a number next to it. The name of this doesn't matter, but it's just convenient here. And then you just add the original function there. And then, like, here you overwrite the function. But you can take alias1 and then call this. And don't forget to have it use the same parameters. And then essentially what this does is it calls the original function. And then, like, you can use that for your new function. Like, maybe maybe, for example, your unit is like using magic or whatever, and you want that to use the original hit rate function. You could then be like, if my dude is using magic, then return, you know, the original calculations or whatever. My dude uses magic. Alternatively, like, you don't necessarily need to make it so that aliases are called conditionally. You could just have, you know, hold on a sec. You could just use the original function but have additional code run. So this right here, what this will do is it will print to the console the word boop, and then it'll just use the original function. Yeah, so like, very important, aliasing your functions allows you to avoid overwriting the original function while adding new functionality to it. And that makes it so that plugins don't fight with each other and, you know, like cannibalize. So as you can see, when I checked his stats, boop showed up over here in the console, just like in my code. But it's still using the original calculations for his hit rate. So there you go. That's how you overwrite, alias, and create plugins. Now, there are other ways you can... There are going to be instances where my method of finding out where shit isn't going to work. For example, let's say you want to, like, modify the unit stat screen. Let me just show you an instance. So, like, this is the unit stat screen, or the unit menu, as you call it. You might be like, all right, what kind of API function messes with that? You're probably going to find that it's very difficult to find here. But there's a certain thing that's very useful called resource location. And you could look at these tabs, and you could see that many animations, media graphics, and whatnot have an internal name, which is important because in the game script, it uses these. So, like, for example, the unit menu, which is what we just saw. It uses the internal name unit menu. So what we can do is be like, unit menu, and you're going to find an instance where the game queries that. Oh, hold on. Okay, so let's put it between quotations. That's weird. Did I type it right? Oh, you know what? Maybe it's a single thingy. There we go. Yeah, right here. Query screen, unit menu. All right, so at some point the game, like, grabs the parameters of the screen, as you can see right here. So it grabs all this information in this function here. What is this function used by? Well, it's a function of unit menu screen. Well, there you go. This is the unit menu screen object. So now you can start messing with this. I'll get into, like, how objects in SRPG Studio tend to work, because they have move and draw functions, and they also usually have, like, a setup function. You assign their, like, personal variables up here. But I'm just going to do a basic ass edit. I'm going to change the position of the guy's face. So, like, let me just grab it here. All right, so his face is right here. I'm going to move it a couple pixels to the right because fuck it, why not? So, I'm basically just going to look around for anything that looks like it has anything to do with the face. Draw screen bottom text. All right, so that's probably related to the description text. Draw screen cycle. Get window width. Is unit sentence visible? Top window. Interesting. So this dot underscore top window. So that's like a personal variable that the unit menu screen has. It starts out as null, but somewhere it gets assigned probably. right here. Bam. Top window equals create object unit top window. All right. So it's creating an object called unit top window. Let's see where that is. All right. It's found here. Ooh, this is getting interesting. Draw unit face. Interesting. All right. So fuck it. We're gonna overwrite draw window content so that it draws the unit's face a little bit further to the right. So we're going to add another alias here. Var alias2 equals unit, top menu unit window. And then we're going to change that function instead right here. Draw unit face, because like that way. Actually, you know what? No. We're just gonna keep it nice, simple, and clean. Equals function. And remember to keep the original arguments for it. So this would be X and Y. In this case, I'm just gonna copy the original code. And we're just gonna add plus 50 to this. Fuck it. Sure. Let's see if that worked. Bam! Look at that shit, baby! You know you like it! So yeah, there you go. That's how you find shit in SRPG Studio and then mess with it. Next tutorial, I'm going to be teaching how to mess with objects and do their draw and move function shit. Later. Alright, here we go. Hello everyone, MarkyJoe1990 here, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make move draw objects. So, I guess to start, what are move draw objects? They are an object in SRPG Studio that has a move function and a draw function. A move function is basically a function the object runs every single frame in the game. SRPG Studio runs at 60 frames per second, so that means this function is run 60 times per second. And basically what the move function does is, number one, it does all the processing for that object. Such as like, for example, if you're in a menu, the menu has an object within it that detects your input. You know, if you're pressing up or down, it'll move the cursor down and it'll be like, all right, this is the thing they're currently selecting, like they're selecting the short sword. And then after it's done doing all the processing and calculations for that object, it returns a value called move result. Now, move result has 4 different results. There's move result continue, which tells the game like, okay, this object we're going to continue running this object and like continue the processing. There's move result end, which is telling the game, okay, we're done with this object, you can move on and stop doing shit with it. There's also move result select, which is usually used when you're in a menu and you select an item. It tells the game, okay, the player made a selection. And of course there's move result cancel, which tells the game, oh, the player canceled out. Now, as for the draw function, it pretty much does exactly what you would expect. It draws the object. So, why are move draw functions so important? Almost everything in the game is some kind of move draw object. For example, let me bring up let's do some fighting. See this right here, the attack command? This is an object, and it goes through different phases. It has you select a sword, it has you select a target, and then you go through a battle, and then, you know, it does other stuff afterward. So, like, during all that, as you're going through this command, the game is, like, moving and drawing these windows, trying to detect your input. Like, there's probably a move function in there that checks to see if I'm pressing the Z button, so it could be like, oh, he pressed the Z button, so he's selecting the short sword. And then, you know, it's, you know, doing all the calculations and drawing the window and shit. You get what I mean. Event commands, windows, even the player phase is a type of move draw object. So you could probably see why this is really important. I mean, shit. The thing you're looking at right now, it's raining and shit. That is a result of move, draw, object wizardry by yours truly. You can also use move, draw objects to create targeting lines from 3 houses, custom event commands such as name entry, and even the rally skill, all of which I've done because I'm a fucking badass and shit. Simply put, the most ambitious plugins for SRPG Studio are likely to use move, draw, draw objects in some way, shape, or form. Now, some things I have not mentioned are like optional shit that move draw functions have. Like, for example, a lot of move draw objects in SRPG Studio have like some kind of enter function that at the end it will return an enter result instead of a move result. And what enter result does is it tells the game like, oh, okay, it's safe to start running this object and drawing it and doing all the calculations. But sometimes, depending on certain conditions, the enter function of an object will return enter result not enter, which tells it the opposite, like don't continue with this. In a lot of custom event commands, if the game's like, oh, I wasn't able to detect the event command you want, it'll just be like, no, don't enter it. And instead of giving you like a crash or whatever, the game will just simply not run your event, which was very frustrating until I learned that you have to configure your custom event commands to this array right here in order to get the game to detect it. So yeah, you got enter functions in objects, which isn't in all of them, but a good number of them have it, such as event commands. Sometimes they're, instead of being called enter functions, I'll call them open functions. Where is it? Right here. Okay, so like certain commands such as the attack command, instead of saying enter command, it'll say open command. And similar to the enter and open, similar to the enter functions, it usually returns a result, not always. Sometimes it'll just be like, all right, we're just using this to prepare the object. Let me unit command attack. Let me show you so that you can see on the screen. Right here. So, yeah, right here. See, as you can see, it doesn't have like a return value. It doesn't tell it like, oh, okay, it's safe to enter. It simply prepares the command by setting a bunch of variables, creating a few objects that are going to be used later. For example, when you're selecting a weapon, the game starts moving and drawing the object, the weapon select menu in which you select your weapon. And then afterwards you select a target, which is done using the pause selector, and so on and so forth. So basically, the enter function can be used to prepare the object and also to tell the game, okay, it's safe to start processing the object. So another function that some objects have is the initialize or setup function. Now, with my bouncy ball object, which you don't see in the game yet, but let me turn that on. Let me remove the rain so that's easier to see. Yeah, this is my little bouncy ball and shit. Oh god, what's with all this gibberish over here? I think that's because of the weather plugin, so don't worry about it. So, when the game generates this ball, it does a command called create object right here. And what create object does is it makes an instance of a bouncy ball and then executes its initialize function if it has it. And similar to the enter or open functions, it's mainly used to just set things up. As you can see here, it's like setting up a canvas, it's setting the coordinates of the ball and whatnot. However, sometimes an object won't have an initialization function. Sometimes it'll have like a function like setup or so on and so forth. And instead of automatically being ran when the object's created, those are usually manually run by whatever other object is using this object. So like if I wanted to, I could probably like right now the bouncy ball is set to just like automatically set its own X and Y coordinates, but I could create a function like setup function x, y, and then be like this x equals x, this y equals y, and then I could be like, in the event command cycle, I could be like this ball setup zero zero, and that will essentially do all the setting up for me. Basically, setup functions are meant to just like give you a bit more flexibility on how to like spawn your thing or to set it up, essentially, which is really important to know. So next, what I'm going to talk about is modes with objects. Now, in most programming, this is referred to as like a state. And basically what it does is modes can be used to change the behavior of the object. So as an example, I'm going to show you my bouncy ball again. When I press the X button, it turns into a square. And if I press it again, it turns into a circle. Now, if you look at my code over here, I have a thing called ball state, which is an enumeration. And like when you initialize the ball, it has this command called change cycle mode, which is a function that all base objects have. And basically I'm telling it set your ball state to ball, and that later on gets factored into other code, specifically my draw function, which is like, oh, wait, where is it? Set degree. Yeah, right here it checks to see what the state of the ball is, or the mode, and if it's ball, then it draws a circle, and if not, it draws a rectangle. Now, in cases such as, like, for example, the player turn object, mode is used a little differently. Right now, the mode that the player turn is in is map up here, and that's basically like you're able to move freely on the map and do all this weird shit. But once you select the player, it goes into area mode, as you can see up here, player turn mode map area. And then I believe after you finish moving, it goes to a new mode called unit command, in which it starts drawing this menu here. And then the unit command has its own set of modes where it's like, you know, after you select the attack command or whatever, it goes into a mode where you select a weapon, you select a target, and then it runs the battle stuff. So that's how modes work. And usually when you go into one mode and you hit cancel, the game will go back to the previous mode it was in. Cancel. Yeah, here's an example. Like this right here, this represents when we're in this mode right here. Move area. So right now it's trying to detect my input. If I press the cancel button, it's going to go here and then change its mode to map mode, which, as you can see, is, you know, the mode where you're just on the map. So yeah, that's how modes work for objects. It's completely optional, but it's extremely helpful to have, especially if you're making like a command that has multiple menus you need to traverse. You're gonna have to have a separate mode for each of those menus, just so that, you know, the game doesn't like go nuts and like have like multiple menus just being interactable all at once. You don't necessarily need to use modes if you want your object to have different states to it. You can also use what's called a StraightFlow. Now, I haven't really used StraightFlow objects, but it's very similar to modes, except instead of being able to, like, for example, like I'm in area mode and I can cancel and go back to map mode. What makes StraightFlow different is that it goes in a linear direction. Like, you know, here's an example. This is an example of a StraightFlow function right now. So, as you might know, in SRPG Studio, if you're on a mounted unit or like you have the skill use leftover move, then after you do certain actions, you will be able to use your leftover move. But the game also tries to detect other things there. Let me just... It also tries to detect other things, such as, like, after you end your turn, it checks to see if the tile you're standing on is a place event tile with the wait type set to it. And so if that's true, it will go through this flow entry as well, where it just executes that event command. And then afterwards, if you have a skill that allows you to act again, such as with the act again skill, it will then execute that so long as you hit the requirements on its activation. So let me show you this in action. This is a StraightFlow in action. This one is set to do use left over move, execute place wait events, and then do act again shit afterward. So I'm gonna attack this dude. I'm gonna move again. I'm going to go to my place event, which is going to cause it to execute the event, and then afterwards it's gonna make me do that, do the whole act again shit. So that's an example of a StraightFlow. They're not too complicated, but basically with a StraightFlow, which is a move draw object in and of itself, you have to push flow entries into it. And this is actually how the game handles a lot of things, believe it or not. Like when you're in a battle, you'll notice that everything is handled in a linear order. The characters attack, you gain experience, and then the screen fades out. I believe that most of that is part of, like, those are all separate flow entries ordered in such a way where they act in that order. And that's more or less how StraightFlow entries work. Let's say you finished making your little move draw object. The game's not going to acknowledge it right away. Typically, the way you have to make your object work is that you have to put it in some pre-existing function in the game, like another move draw object. You have to, like, make it create that object, and then in its own move draw functions, you have it set to move and draw that object. As an example, I believe my weather script, weather, rain, let me just do that stuff. So, like, as you can see, even during the event command and whatever, it's still running. I believe my weather script is set to work so long as you're on the map, but I need to quickly check to confirm this. Plug in weather effects. I believe it's in the alias function. Yeah, so like the map layer here. Basically what I did is I aliased the map layer map layer function, which is again a move draw object, and I have it move in one of my own objects called a weather generator, and that does a whole bunch of stuff like spawn little weather spawn rain or snow on the map, does the calculations for every single like little snowflake or whatever, and then I alias the draw unit layer thing to draw the weather generator. Now, that's not the only way you can make your move draw objects work, however. For example, with event commands, you can create your event command. And by the way, if you want to like know how to like build one from scratch, you're gonna want to look for base objects of various kinds. Like, for example, event commands have like a base event command object. And this will tell you like what functions that has that you might want to consider putting into your own, which usually is the case. But here's the thing, with my event command, like just simply creating it isn't enough for the game to detect it. And you can't put it within another move draw object because this is supposed to function as its own thing. What usually will end up happening is that for certain things, such as like if you want to add a new unit command, map command, or like event command, and so on and so forth, you will need to find a function that configures that new object into its array of objects that it already has. Let me see if I could give an example. Like, for example, your unit commands. Configure unit. There's probably some sort of like function that configures the attack command to be one of the options you can choose. So let me see if I can find it. Yeah, right here. So like this is all the possible unit commands in the game. If you wanted to add a new unit command, you would have to make a plugin that essentially, you know, group array append object unit command fuck you, and then you would have to create that unit command object and define what it does. So that's the two different ways of making your objects work. In the case of event commands, you also need to give it a name, and you know, there's certain functions here that are required, but you get the gist. Oh, one last thing before you guys go. The bouncy ball script that I made is available on my GitHub. I created it with the intention of teaching people how to make move draw objects, and so it's loaded with tons of comments explaining how everything works. So if you want to learn how move draw objects work and how to make them yourself, I highly recommend going over to my GitHub and getting that script.